Hello?
Let me give you a little motto I live my life by.
Bang, bang, bang the drum.
What? That's not a motto. That's just you saying a bunch of things.
It's difficult to name one favorite drummer.
Roy. Hey.
Wow. You're amazing, dude.
Thanks. I like to play.
Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Drummers Weekly Groovecast. Drummers Weekly Groovecast. Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Right, I'm in Atlanta, and I was thinking of you. So I know I'm getting close to getting back home, and I'll be working on Ligety, and I'm gonna do some overdubs on 3 Views of a Secret, and with Peter. He's very. I'll be candid with you. He's very finicky about stuff. So he wanted me to change some things on, and I said he wanted me to change some things in the arrangement. I said, Peter, I'm not going to change anything. This is Silvio's arrangement. So this is what it is. I can change some stuff, but I wanted to talk to you first. So I said, let me talk to Silvio first, and then if he's okay with me changing some things, I'll do it. And then, that would be great. That would be great. We mix it with Jimmy Branley. Okay, all right. And I'm waiting. I'm gonna wait until April to do Ada and Randy Brecker. Okay. Okay. That's perfect. Mm-hmm. You have a beautiful day. Bye. He's in a car in Sicily. He's going to Syracuse, which is a little town in Sicily. They're going to dinner.
I'm sure the weather's better there than it will be in
It's
our
pretty
Syracuse.
nice there right now. He said that's beautiful there.
Jimmy, this is already a show of firsts, man. We are in the lobby of a hotel. It's our first bassist interview, and we also just had our first transatlantic phone call.
That's exactly right, from Sicily.
Well, yeah, and don't let it be lost that this guy's from Sicily. You better do a great job on his project, man. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I've been to Sicily many times.
Well, and one other thing. I don't want this to sneak through the cracks. You mentioned something at the very beginning of the phone call where you said Ligety?
Yes.
As in the composer?
As
Ligety?
It was a all right, do you want to know a little bit about this guy? Okay, his name is Silvio Amato. He's a film composer, and he's from Sicily. But he's been living in LA for quite a while, doing some stuff for Disney and some other film companies there. Very talented gentleman. I was doing some bass overdubs with Jimmy Branley on some other project, and Jimmy said, "Hey, I want to play something I just played on and get your opinion." And I said, "Okay." And so he played me this piece, and it was absolutely beautiful. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Wow." I said, "It's really beautiful." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, this guy's doing a record now. He's a film composer, and he's looking for a producer." And he said, "If it's okay, can I give him your phone number?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "That sounds like some interesting music." So I got a call from this guy Silvio. He was at that time in Los Angeles. And we talked on the phone, and then we arranged for a meeting, had a meeting. The meeting went quite well. He hired me to produce his record. So that was about 3 months ago. And so the main thing I do when I first start out is I just get the artist or the band to send me everything they got, even stuff they weren't even considering to record. I just want to hear what's going on, and because now I'm going to be listening to stuff that's not like in the forest, not being able to look through the trees. I'm getting an outside perspective, a fresh perspective on what they have. So that's what I did. I listened to about 30 pieces of music of Silvio's, and he needed help with direction and focus. So I narrowed it down to 8 pieces of music from the 30 pieces. I had another meeting with him, and he totally loved what I picked, but he said, shouldn't it have more than 8 pieces? I said, well, you can make a record with 8 pieces of music, but if you want to add up 1 or 2 more pieces, then you have 9 or 10. That's fine. So he goes, yeah. Was there anything else there? And I said, no. I really feel like these 8 had a direction and a focus. And I said, if you're interested, maybe I could recommend maybe doing a cover that would fit with what you have. And he says, he goes, I'm fine with that. So the cover I picked was 3 Views of a Secret, which was written by Jaco Pastorius, and he flipped out over the song. He didn't know the song. So when I played it for him, he kind of flipped out, and then he did an arrangement of it. And the arrangement's cool. I already told him that I wanted to do some work on it, to manipulate it a little bit, and he was fine with that. And then my idea was to get Peter Erskine to play on it. I got Gregoire Marais already play on the piece, who's this wonderful harmonica player. And I was going to get this interesting bass player from Germany to play bass on it, who sounds quite a bit like Jaco Pastorius. His name is Jürgen Atteg, and I've been in touch with him through Facebook, actually.
Anything works, right?
Yeah. So that's been my concept for the piece. But when I played it for Peter, he had some questions about the arrangement. So I told Pete to hold on to his hat, and I would discuss with Silvio about changing the piece somewhat so that it would be more comfortable for Peter to play on, because Peter played on the original version.
Right.
Both with Weather Report, which was really the original version, and then later on Jaco's Word of Mouth CD, and even I think they might have played it on this birthday concert that was released by Warner Brothers at one point. So that's one reason I was texting him this morning when you arrived.
Yeah.
And of course he called me to talk.
The other pieces that are going to be on this record, are they kind of like ethereal, ECM-ish kind of sounding things?
Kind of, yeah. They're a real serious crossbreed between, some classical composition, which obviously this gentleman has a real handle on. That's in his wheelhouse. He's a studied piano player, and his scores and stuff he's done for film are more classically oriented. But as you and most people know about classical music, that's also part of the foundation for jazz music. Especially when you listen to people like Messiaen, Prokofiev, even Shostakovich or Penderecki. Some people pronounce that Penderecki. Yeah. But when you listen to that composition, you hear all kinds of jazz harmony in there. So that's what Silvio's done, but he's taken it a little more closer to the jazz type of a recording, because there's all these like trio pieces, so it's drums, bass, and piano with maybe a little orchestration. And I've hired a string bass player to play on a bulk of the material, a gentleman named Trey Henry, who's a great bass player and lives in L.A., so I got him.
Didn't he play with Tierney?
He just produced, I think, 1 or 2 pieces on Tierney's new recording. And he plays with, there's sometimes 2 bass players on that gig. Kevin Axt is the other guy. Both really great. I'd like to work with Kevin sometime. That's the thing. I've been producing quite a bit since I left the Yellowjackets in 2012. So in that period of time, I've gotten to work with a lot of really great string bass players and electric players too.
I kind of want to get a little bit of information about what you've been doing recently and kind of talk about some of these projects that you are producing, because it sounds like from when we were setting everything up, you're doing probably more producing right now than actual playing.
I am. I made a conscious decision now 7 years ago, 2012. There was a number of things on the table. I'd been in the Yellowjackets for 32 years, and I just started feeling like, I needed to maybe change my focus career-wise, and I was grappling with it because I had a lot of investment in Yellowjackets at that time.
A lot of skin in the game, man. Yeah.
And of course, I love playing with William Kennedy, and he had just come back in the band after being gone for 10 years. So that was an issue, but at the time I was getting solicited quite a bit to produce, so that became an issue. For possibly either taking a hiatus or actually leaving the band and focusing on production. And so that's what I did. That's the decision I made. There was other little, not little things, but other things involved. My family. I was turning 60 at the time.
Do the math, folks.
Yeah, starting this, 7 years ago. So it's kind of like, how long can I travel? I was traveling a lot with the band, and I already had traveled probably around the world 10 times, so it was time for me to do a little re-evaluation and look at what's ahead, and production seemed to make a lot of sense, and I kind of cut my teeth a bit with the Jackets being in that production chair with everyone else, with mainly Russ Ferrante, but the other guys also chimed in, and then I had done quite a bit of recording sessions in the late 70s and through the 80s. So I got to work with all these really great producers, and I even started compiling a list of all these producers that I had worked with in that period of time in my career. And I've come to realize that I worked with some really great guys, and I learned a lot from each and every one of those people, just watching them, checking out what they did. And some of those guys were engineers, so it even went beyond producing in a way. I mean, like mic selection, how to record a cello, like all different kinds of things like that. So
production chops are a whole different set of chops compared to playing chops. You just don't all of a sudden hang out a shingle one day and say, I'm going to be a producer. Well, I don't know. I take that back. Here in Atlanta, a lot of people actually do that. But
there's a lot to deal with. Yeah.
When you're recording musicians and you're putting together, especially, let's take, for example, I'm going to call it, when you talked about the Project of Silvio and you got Erskine, that's almost like a chamber jazz kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Almost, right? That's a whole different set of production chops to somebody going in the studio and, laying down beats for a rap album.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, yeah, the combination of deciding that you're going to do that and then leaving arguably one of the most successful fusion groups in the history of the genre, that took a bit of soul searching, I feel sure.
It did. And occasionally I still grapple with that decision, but
sure.
But all I can say is when I left the Yellowjackets in 2012, I had already produced about 90 recordings, and since I left, so in 7 years, I've produced almost 80 records. So anywhere between 10 and 14 records a year.
Wow.
So the focusing on this type of career has in some way really come together, and it's given me confidence that I can continue on at this point for as long as I can to just keep producing. And look, I still get to come out on the road for short periods of time, like I am right now with Oz and Dave Weckl.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that in one second,
Okay.
but I want to step back, and I'm going to ask you to recall the impossible. Do you remember, by any chance, playing in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1990 at a little club called Ella Garou's with the Yellowjackets?
It rings a bell. You can imagine that in 32 years I did quite a few gigs.
I can't remember the gig I did this morning.
I remember a lot of things, and obviously there's certain gigs that will always stand out.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, this Knoxville gig doesn't stand out, but I do remember playing in Knoxville. I remember the town.
The reason I'm even bringing that up, of course, I was there. I was in school up there at that time. That was one of the finest pure listening rooms that existed. It doesn't exist any longer, but man, there was a long lineage of people that played in that room. Tony Williams' quintet played in that room. Freddie Hubbard's quintet played in that room. Yellowjackets played in there, on and on and on. So it was a great little venue, man. It's just too bad it's not.
Sorry, it's not there anymore.
Yeah. Well, now let's go back and talk about why you're here in Atlanta right now. And I think it's also worth saying that I'm talking with Jimmy Haslip right now, and not the drummer from this group. And it's primarily because nobody knows who this guy is that's playing drums. And I can't I can't bring somebody on the show that I have to do a ton of bio on,
Oh no.
And so I couldn't bring him on, so that's why I've got Jimmy Haslip on the show. But the reason you are here is we have a mutual friend who's actually also been on this show. I've known him for 30 some odd years. He was actually, I'm virtually certain, at that same Yellowjacket show at Ella Garou's. That's how we were in school together up there. And then he and I have played thousands of gigs together. But it was Joe Moore who brought us together on this. And so you're here with Oz Noise Trio, and you guys are playing another great little listening room here in town. And if you could just tell everybody kind of what you guys are doing as far as if you're doing Oz's music, I'm sure.
Okay, so we're playing the Velvet Note, and it seats 40 people. So we do 2 shows a night. So if sold out, we play to 80 people. From what I understand, all the shows are sold out. So, and we were booked here for 3 nights.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already done the first 2 nights, and all 4 shows have been sold out. It's been really cool. Oz, this is my, I have to say, technically my 5th tour with Oz, and my 3rd time playing with Dave Weckl. So I've done 3 tours now, or in the process of doing the 3rd tour with Dave Weckl, and I've done 2 tours with Keith Carlock. So Oz has this really cool music. It's some of it's quite complex, and he calls it twisted blues. And he's a phenomenal guitar player, very interesting, very unique. Uses a lot of very crazy effects, and he's actually, in reality, what I've gathered over the years of playing with him, he's like a rock and roll bebop player, which is a crazy thing to put together, but that's really where he's coming from. He's a wonderful musician, and he's a really great band leader. Really fun to work with, and always puts together these cool groupings of people. And some other great drummers and bass players have been involved with him over the years, from like Will Lee to James Genus, Etienne Mbappe, and then of course Anton Fig, and Keith, as I mentioned. So, and Dave, obviously. So we're doing this tour. It started on February 28th, and it ends on the 24th in St. Louis. So it's a serious little run. And he's got a new record out called Boogaloogaloo. And that's what we're out here promoting.
Gotcha. Are you guys going to be able to go home any before you get to the end of this tour? Or are you just going straight through?
We're going straight through with helmets on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, when you do get back, you have already mentioned someone that you're going to be doing some work with who is going to be a future guest on the show. So I'm letting the cat out of the bag here.
Right.
And you've got a group called Elemental.
Yes.
Right. And so you've already mentioned Jimmy Brantley. That's who's the drummer is in that group. What's going on with that group right now?
Well, everyone's real busy. It features, I guess it features all three of us. It's a trio, but it's the main focus is Otmaro Ruiz, who's the pianist and keyboardist in the trio. He wrote all the material except for one tune that he was a fan of that I wrote with Russ Ferrante called Boomtown, and he did an arrangement of it. So we recorded that on the Elemental record. That, I guess technically, that came out in January, I think. So Jimmy's got a really hectic and busy schedule. He's playing with, I think he's been touring with Colin Hay from Men at Work.
Yeah.
And that's a really good gig. And Colin's a sweetheart. I got to meet him, and I actually did some jamming with Jimmy. And then he also has been touring and recording with Keiko Matsui, and that's ongoing. And Otmaro's is a new keyboard player in Simon Phillips' Protocol. Who they were nominated for a Grammy this year. So he's got a busy schedule with Simon. I know Simon's doing a new record now, I think, and there'll be a bunch of touring with that. Plus, Otmaro's busy doing a lot of other things. And then, of course, I have my crazy schedule. So there's not a lot on the calendar right now for Elemental, but we do have some gigs in July.
Yeah.
So,
it's the kind of thing when you get folks that are that busy, you literally have to take all the schedules together and put them up against the light and see if you can see an open spot.
That's exactly what we're dealing with. And I know we have a rehearsal scheduled and a couple of gigs in mid to late July. So that's all we got going right now. We're hoping to do more. So we're psyched about this release, and of course it came out with Joseph Moore on Blue Canoe Records, who I've been doing a lot of business with over the last couple of years.
He's a good dude, man.
Yeah,
he's a great
cat. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, and I did put out late last year, like in September, October, another trio project was a collaborative project with Scott Kinsey and 3 drummers, mostly Gergo Borlai, and then we also had Gary Novak and Vinny Colaiuta.
But say that last name again. Nobody knows who that guy is either.
Vinny Colaiuta, yeah. So yes, that came out, like I said, in September, October, and that was a record called Art Trio. And there's literally no gigs on the books right now for that. I did have something booked in November, but it fell apart. It was a festival in Bonn, Germany, and that gig fell apart. But I have an idea of a project, a collaborative project that I'm going to produce, hopefully the end of this year, maybe the beginning of 2020. And it's ambitious. I've been producing a German composer. I've now produced 3 records for a gentleman named Michael Schmidt, who was a big band drummer living in Bremen, Germany. And now he's just basically focused on composing. He's not playing drums.
Used to play third base for the Phillies too.
I guess, right.
Yeah.
Except I don't think that Michael Schmidt lived in Bremen, Germany, he's got a project called MSM Schmidt, and it usually involves, each of the records I've produced involve anywhere from 25 to 30 musicians and all kinds of incredible drummers. And I play bass on some of it, but I also brought in other bass players. And the last one we did was about a year ago now, called Life. And that record had 3 really good drummers. Since we're on your show, I might as well mention that. It was Gary Novak and Dave Weckel. Actually, it was 4 drummers now, and I'm trying to remember what all the drummers. Virgil Donati, and there was a drummer from Germany that was a friend of Michael's, and I can't remember his name right now. But so there were 4 really great drummers on that record, and so I've been contacted by Michael Schmidt, and he wants to do another project, and he wanted to do something a little different. So I came up with this idea to do a big band record, and I'm not going to tell you who the big band is. It's actually a pretty cool collaboration, but I will mention that it will involve, as the rhythm section, the Arc Trio, which is
nice.
It's probably going to be Gergo Borlai and Gary Novak.
Uh-huh.
And if I can get Vinny in there, I will. This guy, Vinny Colaiuta, that nobody knows.
Up-and-comer.
And, of course, Scott Kinsey and I. So so that'll be the rhythm section. And then there's this big band that I won't mention right now. And then Michael Schmidt, who's will be the composer.
You've already hinted around at some up-and-coming drummers that you've been playing with, and one of the things that was just amazing to me was when we were setting up the interview, there was a list that came my way. It was, I'm going to say, the most diverse and comprehensive list of some of the greatest drummers that have ever walked the face of the planet that you've worked with. And several of them, well, no, not several, almost all of them, I would like to know something about that, but we don't have enough time. But what I want, there's a lot of guys. But what I would like to do is I have a list of a few people that I want to ask you about.
Okay.
And essentially, why don't you tell us what kind of a project you worked on them with?
Okay.
Give us a little bit of musical characteristics about each of these guys.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, everything, because I realize that some of this stuff is probably a one-off. It might have been a session. It might have been one gig. It might have been that sort. That's completely fine.
There's a number of those. Yeah.
And then I want to finish off when we're doing this list with this little thing of I'm calling drummer anomalies, like people that we wouldn't normally associate with Jimmy Haslip. So I want to start off with three guys that are buddies of mine. They are, we'll call them friends of the show also, because they've been on the show. And also this first guy I'm going to talk to you about, I was actually hanging out with him just a few weeks ago. He was playing at the Velvet Note, and he is the self-proclaimed chairman of the Drummers Weekly Groovecast advisory board. Jimmy, you don't realize this. We have an advisory board here on this show of different guests, and this guy self-proclaimed himself as the chairman, and that is Mr. Joel Rosenblatt.
Oh, yeah, okay.
What did you do with Joel?
Well, I've done a few things with him. Let's see. I have to dig deep because I have done a number of sessions with him, but I remember two things right now, so that's a good start.
Uh-huh.
So one thing I remember first, I mentioned MSM Schmidt.
Right.
So I got a call from a keyboard player named Mitch Foreman.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, really great musician. And he calls me and he says, hey, I'm working on this ambitious project. It's a composer from Bremen, Germany, and he was requesting that maybe you could play bass on like 3 tunes. And I said, okay, yeah, hook me up. And so he hooked me up with Michael Schmidt, and we figured out all the details and negotiations, and then I ended up getting files for the 3 songs, and they were already recorded, and the drummer on the files was Joel Rosenblatt. So I got to play with Joel from afar on that project, and we've done a number of things like that. But the other thing I'll bring up is that I've been playing a lot for the last 11 years with the Jeff Lorber Fusion. And there was a run of dates in Russia that I got called in to do with Jeff Lorber. And the drummer that ended up on the gig with us was Joel Rosenblatt. So I went to Russia. We even played in Siberia, which I'd never been to before, so that was very interesting. And so we got to play some Jeff Lorber Fusion music together, and that was a blast. And I've always been a fan of Joel's. I've known Joel for a long time. I met him probably around the early, maybe mid-'80s, I have to say, when he was playing with Spyro Gyra, I think. And I knew a bunch of the guys in that band. Of course, I knew Jay Beckenstein, and at the time, Dave Samuels was playing vibraphone and marimba with that group. So there's my little bit of. And Joel is a fantastic drummer, really great groove, and we had a blast playing together. So
and a college student buddy of Dave Weckl.
Isn't that
well.
right?
It's funny. I was thinking about this on the way over here. I was thinking if Weckl happened to show up here, so I was going to do this little thing. I was going to have Weckl and myself. We were going to call Rosenblatt at the exact same time and see which phone call he answered.
That's hilarious.
So next person.
Okay.
Tommy Brechtline.
Okay. Now that's really interesting because Tom and I both grew up on Long Island. So
exactly.
I used to hear his name all the time. We never met while we were growing up on Long Island, but I personally, I can say I used to hear his name. And there was a place that I would play at every once in a while with a bunch of guys. There was, I believe, kind of I'm trying to think the town. It was either Northport or Centerport was a little town. It was this place called Henry Africa's that I used to play in, and I know Tom used to play there with other people, and maybe even some mutual people. I can't remember that clearly, but we finally did meet when I moved to Los Angeles, and he was living there. So we met, and I think even before we played together, if I'm not mistaken, I turned him on to a gig. This is really wild. I was in, like, I want to say Bangor, Maine, with the Yellowjackets, and we were opening for Jean-Luc Ponty.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew Jean-Luc because we had seen each other a bunch, and we would say hello. And I also worked with I worked with one drummer for sure that he worked with earlier on, Mark Cranny, who I saw him originally with Jean-Luc Ponty, and then later started actually playing with him in a band, Tommy Bolin. So, but I overheard a phone call, and back then there was no cell phones. He was on a payphone, and I overheard him talking to somebody about trying to find a drummer to finish the tour. Because I think the drummer on the gig was Rayford Griffin, and he had the split for some reason. And so overhearing that phone call, I walked up to Jean-Luc and I said, "Man, you're looking for a drummer to finish your tour?" And he goes, "Yes, absolutely." So I said, "Well, I know a couple of guys. If it's okay, I'll make a call and see if I can hook you up." And he said, "That would be great." So the first guy I called was Tom Breckline on a payphone in Bangor, Maine, and he answered the phone. And I said, "Man, I think I got a gig for you with Jean-Luc Ponty. Want me to hook you up?" And he said, "Absolutely." So I gave Jean-Luc Ponty Tom's phone number. He called him, and he got on the gig.
Great story, man. And also, one quick thing, that Joel Rosenblatt, Tom Breckline are two guys that are just two of the most musical players, man.
Great.
That you will ever hear. Tons of chops, but know exactly when and where to use them, man. Just amazing players.
So, and I've done a bunch of things with Tom, and I can't even remember everything I've done with him. But one thing we did, we toured Japan with Robin Ford and Neil Larson. That was one thing I can remember. And we also did a Neil Larson record, direct-to-disc recording that we recorded in the lobby of Bernie Grunman's mastering house.
Okay.
And that was and Robin was in the band. So it was Robin, Neil Larson, Tom Breckline, myself, and then two horn players, which were Gary Meek on saxophone and Lee Thornburg on trumpet.
Gotcha. One more friend of the show, Sonny Emery.
Who lives here.
Absolutely. Little south. He's actually a long way away. It's in Atlanta, but it's a long way from here. He's on the south side.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so the first time I met Sonny, I believe, if my memory doesn't fail me, was a gig that I was subbing on, because at the time, this had to have been in the mid '80s, and I was not only in the Yellowjackets, but I was also in Al Jarreau's band, touring extensively all over the place. So I had a connection with that management, and the same management also managed a guy named David Sanborn. So David Sanborn was scheduled to do the Johnny Carson show, and the bass player, for some reason, I don't know who that was, but he couldn't make that gig. So I got a call from the management, and they asked me if I was available, and I said yeah. And so I ended up playing the Johnny Carson show with David Sanborn, and on drums was Sonny Emery. So
nice, man.
That was the first time I think I played with them, and then we really didn't. And that was actually extra special because we did this song that was kind of a hit for David that was written by Michael Cimbello. So Michael Cimbello actually sang the tune and played guitar. And I think after that, we didn't see each other for quite a while. And then I can't remember what the next thing was, but I know that I can say that we have now done probably at least 50 or more gigs with the Jeff Lorber Fusion.
Nice. Yeah, man. Now, here's one that's a little bit off of everybody's radar. Denny McDermott.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that was probably a one-off, and I believe that was a weird little project in a good way. I was doing a seminar at Full Sail, which is like a recording school in in Winter Park, Florida. And the owner of the school approached me and asked me to do some recording for him. He was going to be doing a record. He was a singer-songwriter. And so we scheduled some dates, and I went in the studio first with Abe Laboriel Jr. And recorded a bunch of tracks with this guy. And then I left. I went back to LA, and then he called me and he said he wanted to do some more recording, and Denny McDermott was the drummer.
Yeah, for people who are not really familiar with Denny McDermott, one of the easiest things that you can listen to him on is he is on that Donald Fagen New York Rock and Soul Review, and then he also played on a couple of tracks on Kamakiriad as well. And I actually got to know Denny through this bizarre weirdo connection, man, like we all get to know other people, where he was in Atlanta. It was, man, probably 15 years ago, and he was doing like some kind of like an industrial kind of a corporate style gig, and they hired me to play like keyboard percussion and congas and stuff like. And so I got to know Denny and the bassist Lincoln
Goines,
not Lincoln Goines, Lincoln Schaefer, I think, got to know him. They came
New
down,
York guys,
New York cats, man, that came down and did that. And so anytime I get a chance to talk about Denny, he's such a great cat. I hadn't talked to him in a long time, but and a marvelous player, man. Boy, just a really deep pocket, soulful player, man.
Exactly.
You know,
and that was a fun session, and that it was a one-off. But funny enough, we have the connection of the Donald Fagen thing, because I did a bunch of things with Donald Fagen, but mostly with I'm trying to think. He's one of the drummers on the list, but is it Leroy
Clouden?
Leroy Clouden.
Yeah. Who's also he's on Kamakiriad, and he is also on, I am pretty sure, Two Against Nature. That Steely Dan.
I think he is. Yeah.
And Sonny Emery's on Two Against Nature also.
Right. And what I did with Leroy and Donald Fagen was some cues and a song for a movie that Donald scored called Bright Lights, Big City.
Wow.
That starred Michael J. Fox.
Yeah.
And there was a song that was entitled Century's End, and Leroy and I played on that track, and that song actually ended up on Steely Dan Gold.
Okay. Yeah. Now, how about Jeff Watts?
Jeff Tame Watts. Okay, that's also a one-off, and that was actually Jeff sitting in with the Yellowjackets.
Whoa. I'm having problems wrapping my head around that one.
And it was.
What year was that?
Let me think about that. That had to have been, I don't know, somewhere around 2010, 2009.
In some ways, that's more believable than it would have been like,
earlier.
20 years prior to that. Yeah.
So he was in London with Branford Marsalis, and the Jackets were playing at Ronnie Scott's. It's a famous jazz club in Soho, London. And they all came down to the gig. So not only did he sit in, but so did Joey Calderazzo.
Okay.
They sat in with me and Bob Mintzer. And actually, I think Russ stayed on board. So Joey played piano and Russ played like a synth thing. And then it was Bob Mintzer and I and Tane.
Nice, man.
And we just played some blues, you know.
Well, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Danny Gottlieb.
Danny Gottlieb. Okay, I did some recording with him, but the main memory I have of Danny was doing a live recording at the Baked Potato with a guitarist named Jeff Richman. And we did a trio record for a German record label. And I'm trying to remember the title of the record. Wow, it's on I could see the cover, but it was all Jeff Richman's music, and Jeff Richman put this trio together with me and Danny. And I don't even remember the year. I can't recall the actual year that it was released. I'd have to look that up.
Danny's a sweetheart.
But Danny's great. I loved playing with him, and of course I was a big fan of his from the Pat Metheny group. And that was the one time that we really kind of dug in because we had to do a whole record together. So that was really a fun and cool experience.
Danny.
I'm also a fan of Mark Egan. So.
Oh, yeah. Danny is teaching down at the University of North Florida right now. He's full-time faculty down there. You're not going to find a better fit for that also. He's just one of the most encouraging, nicest, sweetest guys. And I mean, I don't know many people that have more pedagogical chops than that guy also. So it's like being able to like correctly articulate the way things are supposed to be done. So great. Steve Smith.
Okay, Steve Smith. Now that was recent. I hadn't played with Steve Smith. We've known each other for a long, long time. And I think we had come close to working together on a few occasions, but it never came to fruition until I got hired to be part of this drum. It's like a drum fantasy camp in Chicago. That Dave Weckl has a lot to do with. I guess he had done it 10 years in a row. But I was invited to be the bass player in a rhythm section that backed up 4 drummers for that camp. And that was just a couple of years ago. And one of the drummers was Steve Smith. It also had Simon Phillips and the drummer from Styx, and he's Todd Zuckerman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Todd Zuckerman, and then the drummer from Living Color,
Will Calhoun.
Yep, all 4 guys. So I got to play with all 4 of those guys. I'd played with Todd before.
Yeah.
And I'd obviously played with Simon before on a bunch of sessions, but I'd never played with Steve Smith, and I'd never played with Will Calhoun before. So I got to play with 2 new guys, and we played a bunch of stuff. I mean, each guy we had to play 4 tunes with each guy in concert. And then there were a variety of like seminars and things that we all played, and some jam session stuff.
Do you recall with Steve, were you doing, since it was a rock and roll, like a fantasy or drumming fantasy camp, were you doing more of like the Journey type stuff with Steve, or more of the like Vital Information type stuff?
More like Vital Information stuff. In fact, we did a piece of that I think he put together that it featured this Konakol, the Indian cadence. What would you call that? I guess it's Konakol is it's an Indian cadence for percussion.
It's the takite,
Yeah.
takite.
So he had a piece that he taught us that included that cadence, and that was a blast playing that. And then some more like vital information type pieces. Yeah.
And Steve's one of those guys. He got bored with regular drumming. He had to find something more difficult.
Yeah, he was incredible.
Billy Cobham.
That also was a one-off, and that was an interesting session. It was actually a live performance. So I guess he was booked to play this club in Cologne, Germany, and they didn't have a bass player, and so I think the promoter was the one responsible for getting me on the gig, and they called me and said, "Can you come to Cologne and do this gig with Billy Cobham and some German musicians?" And I think Eric Marienthal was also involved. And so I said, yeah, sure, it'd be great. So I went and did that. And I came close to doing some more things with him after that, but schedule-wise, it just didn't work out. So I just did this one live gig that I think was broadcasted on German radio or something.
Now, there's a little bit of an ulterior motive for me, in particular, asking about Billy Cobham. And to the best of your abilities, if you can kind of bridge the gap between these two, I see a whole lot of influence of Billy Cobham on Will Kennedy.
Ah,
right?
Yes.
Did you feel similarities when you were playing with those guys?
I did.
Yeah.
Although Will also, to me, has this Oakland hump to it,
Yeah.
So I even hear some some serious Oakland funk coming from Will, which I immediately heard the first time I heard him, which was on an Andy Narell record. I bought the record because I was interested to hear Andy Narell play jazz type music on steel drums.
I actually saw him at Ella Guru's in Knoxville too.
Well, he's awesome, and I got Andy to actually play on my first solo record, so that was a blast.
Yeah.
But I bought this record, which Will Kennedy was on, and I was completely blown away with Will.
Yeah. J.R. Robinson.
J.R. I did a bunch of recording with in L.A. I think I've done some live playing with him around town, but mostly studio work and a lot of different sessions. The first Kenny G record, which was produced by Jeff Lorber of all people, because later on hooked up with Jeff in a big way. I've now produced 6 Jeff Lorber fusion records, and in process of working on the 7th. But let's see. So I can mention a few things. So Brenda Russell, did some Brenda Russell sessions with JR. A guy named Michael Ruff, composer, keyboardist. And I produced a record with a wonderful composer, multi-instrumentalist, and arranger, Vince Mendoza. It was a project for the VDR Orchestra, which is out of Cologne, Germany. That's their radio orchestra. And it was a whole recording that featured them, but they wanted to have all these famous singers on the recording. So that was part of my job. I was hired to bring in some singers to this project. So I brought in Shaka Khan, Brenda Russell, Gino Vanelli, Lori Perry, and Al Jarreau. And there were 2 rhythm sections. One of the rhythm sections was the Yellowjackets, which I brought in. And the other rhythm section was myself with JR and Mike Landau and Paul Jackson Jr. and a keyboard player named CJ Vanston.
Yeah. Let's stay in the studio realm for a second.
Okay.
You got a Jeff Porcaro credit on here, too.
I did a bunch of sessions with Jeff. Yeah. That was obviously an awesome experience to, at any point in time, to be in the studio with him. And I remember being in the studio with him early on when I had just moved to LA, and I did learn a lot just from checking him out and seeing how he dealt with certain things. It was quite a learning experience just being around him. But an incredible musician, and talk about a pocket. I don't think I played with anybody that had quite that kind of a pocket in playing music.
There was a certain sound he got when he hit the snare drum that's that intangible that you can't teach that intangible, man. It's one of those things. And then he also had that real silky right hand, man, that it created a certain kind of a lope, whenever he played. And again, that's another one of those things, man. That's an intangible that you just can't teach somebody, when you're doing that. I mean, you can sit there and write the notes on a page all day long, but, there's certain things that are not going to translate.
I think
he had it.
The one guy that came close to that I did a bunch of sessions with was Carlos Vega.
He's on the list.
Yeah, I played with him a bunch too. And he was, I'd have to say, he was pretty close to what Jeff Porcaro was, but there's only one Jeff Porcaro. So there.
Now that we because we're gonna kill 3 birds with one stone here, okay? Because you mentioned Carlos Vega, and then we just talked about Porcaro. We talked about Robinson. Those are 3 what we'd call prototypical LA studio guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
The obvious comparisons or the obvious likenesses are, well, yeah, these guys are going to have great sounding gear, studio ready gear. They're going to be able to just bury clicks whenever they play that kind of stuff.
They did, yeah.
Right. So, but now, how would you contrast those 3 guys, though? Because they do sound very, very different.
They do. Again, I have to put Jeff first on the list because I never played with anybody that was anything like him. It was just the way things felt.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost undescribable. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
Which, myself being basically self-taught and just having more or less a natural instinct about playing a groove and just feeling where the center of the pocket is. I kind of have an instinctual feeling about that. And when I played with Jeff, it was unconscious, So with other guys, sometimes you have to do a little more math and, try to experiment a little bit to find that spot, the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. Because, again, everybody plays differently. Everybody feels things differently. And I kind of feel like I've been able to find centers of all these guys I've played with, the center of their pocket, and then be able to lock in with that. So, I'm not patting myself on the back about it all. It's my job.
Of course. Yeah.
And it's a job that I fulfill joyfully because I love doing, getting that. I love finding that and feeling that. So whatever it takes to get there, I'm happy to do it. And I have no ego about it. I'm just trying to do my job and do it well. But so Jeff would have to come be the number one guy, and then I would say, Carlos would be second, and even I remember a session I did with Carlos that was really tough, and it was a song that I wrote. It was on a Luis Conti record, and I was trying to get him to play something else, but sometimes you tell something to someone and they have their way of looking at it, and they may not listen to your guidance, and that's okay. And then I know enough about people skills to push to a certain extent, and then once you've reached a certain point, if they're not doing what you're asking them to do, then it's time to release that request in order to keep a good vibe going, because that's the most important part of a session, is to keep the vibes positive and forthright and moving forward. So if it means sacrificing your concept of how to play a certain tune in order to keep this joyful and positive experience of recording, then it's worth letting go of anything that I personally might be looking to do.
Do you ever doubt yourself in a situation like that when you're producing something? Okay, and then you've got the idea, and you got, let's say, you got Carlos Vega. He was sitting over there, right?
Yeah, an incredible drummer.
And his reputation precedes himself. He's an incredible player. Do you ever get the doubt, though, when you're saying, okay, look, Carlos, I want it to go this way, that you might be taking the camera out of Spielberg's hands, so to speak? You know what I mean?
Well, that thought that definitely occurs. But I know that when I wrote this piece of music, I had a certain groove in mind, and I felt that would have been the right way to approach the music. But Carlos had something else in mind, and it wasn't budging. So at a certain point, I just let it go, and I let Carlos do, what he was intending to do, and then now. We finished that recording, and that song lived in that certain interpretation of groove.
Were you happy with it?
And no, but it's still, it made it on the record, and it was a good take.
Yeah.
And technically it was happening, and what Carlos played was very interesting. In fact, I'll take something that an engineer once told me when I asked him about my bass sound, because I was using some kind of exotic bass, and he said, "I'll give it an I for interesting." So that's what I would give that drum track.
Gotcha. Now,
but it accomplished the recording of the song. And I had to, step back and just say, okay, this is an interpretation of something I wrote, and I'll live with it, and it is Carlos Vega, so I'll just sit back and finish the recording. And Luis Conti, who was the artist, was happy with it, and that's another thing to take under consideration: is the artist happy? If he's happy, then you've accomplished a good thing,
Good. Now, follow my method to my madness here, okay? This next guy I'm going to talk to you about is what a lot of people are considering the modern-day Jeff Porcaro. And as a matter of fact, has his old gig, Shannon Forrest.
Yes, and I did play with Shannon on a one-off kind of thing. And that was... And I won't be able to recall the artist, but she was a singer out of Las Vegas, and she hired me to produce, I believe it was 4 songs for a record that she was doing. It's a long story, and I won't go into all the details, but I accepted the gig, and I brought in Jeff Porcaro. Jeff Lorber. We were talking about Jeff Porcaro, so I brought in Jeff Lorber to co-produce it with me, because I felt like I needed a little assistance with this particular grouping of songs. So Jeff and I put together some tracks for her, and then she came and listened to the tracks to make sure we got approval of all the arrangement and all that. And then she said, I love the arrangements, I love the tracks, but I want to do them in Nashville. And we were like, wow, okay. I said, so let's hook this up. And she said, okay. And she goes, I'll fly you and Jeff into Nashville, and we're going to use these musicians that are on. There was another producer, and I can't remember his name, but he produced a Christian group called Jars of Clay.
Yeah.
So he was the other producer, and he was doing all the tracks with this group of musicians in Nashville. So I think, and I understood her reasoning then, because then she had kind of a core group of players that would be on the whole record, and that made a lot of sense. So she flew me and Jeff Lorber in, and we got to play with Shannon and some other really great. Doug Moore. Doug Moore is a pedal steel player. There was some great guys. So, and I was impressed with Shannon. He was great. He played really great, and we got to play together. We cut the tracks together, and that was awesome. So
the Nashville studio experience is somewhat different than anywhere else.
Yeah,
those folks work quick.
Yeah, they're very fast, and it's very vibrant, as compared to anywhere else. Because now, like for instance, in LA or New York, you're working usually as overdubs, and they're in little small home studios and things like that. Where in Nashville, you have the full-on recording studios, and all the musicians are there in their entirety. From like 2 keyboard players, a guitar, and a pedal steel player who plays doubles on mandolin, and lap steel, and then a drummer, and so it's more like what sessions used to be when I was doing them in LA in the 80s, and 70s for that matter.
Yeah. Terry Bozzio.
Terry, I did a bunch of things with Terry, and that was always interesting because his drum set alone was something to behold. I've known Terry a long time, and then I ended up doing some studio work. The one thing I'll really recall, because I did a multiple amount of sessions with him for a Gary Wright record. So I cut some tracks with Terry at the Village Recorders, and that was for one record. I did 3 records for Gary Wright. So one record was just me and Terry overdubbing on some keyboard stuff that was okay. That overdub session, that was for a Robbie Robertson record.
Yeah.
And that never saw the light of day, but we did record like 3 tunes together for that, and that was being produced by Daniel Lanois. So that was an interesting session. And I also did some sessions with Terry, with Gary producing himself, with Steve Ferris on guitar, and that was for a Gary Wright record. And that also included George Harrison. So that was a very interesting session. Those are the 2 things that I'll remember the most, and I've done some other little things with him, but really an interesting player, obviously. And I've been a big fan of his from Zappa days to Missing Persons. So
yeah, well, while we're on the Zappa topic. Let's go ahead and talk
I
about
play with
Vinny.
a bunch of guys. Yeah, I play with including Terry and Ralph Humphrey and
Chester, by any
Chester
chance?
Thompson, and then of course Vinny.
Yeah. So Vinny, obviously he's on.
He's on our trio. Yep. And he's on a bunch of Jeff Lorber fusion records that I've produced. He's also on a bunch of this MSM Schmidt stuff that I've produced. He's incredible, and I've known him since the late 70s when he first moved into L.A. I actually got into a band with him. It was a singer named Marilyn Scott. She's been around. I did a lot of production for her. I produced 8 records for her. Some of them were co-produced with George Duke, and Vinny was on pretty much all of those records. Maybe not all of them, but a bunch of those. But we were in a band in the late 70s. I believe that's when it was, into the 80s. And the band had Mike Landau, Vinny on drums, Russ Ferrante on keyboards, and myself. And we backed up this singer, Marilyn Scott, who's still around. And I just produced about now 2 years ago her my 9th production for her. So she's still around, and I'm still working with her. But Vinny... That's when I was in that band. That's when I really locked in with Vinny, and we were doing sessions together and doing some live playing together. And that is, I think I've done between him and maybe a couple other guys. I've done the most work with, and incredible to work with him.
Now talk about intangibles. Yeah, Vinny's a guy who, quite honestly, he doesn't hear music the same way. I don't think that most other people hear music. We've talked a little bit about how you kind of put Jeff Porcaro as sort of the gold standard as far as pocket, as where does that go, where that is concerned. With Vinny, how do you feel about his, of course, ability to play pocket, but the ability to just stretch things and just play things that are, I mean,
uncanny.
Please tell me he's gotten you as lost as he's gotten me lost from time to time also whenever he plays.
I think a couple of times I got lost. He threw me, and that's when I learned that I should just rely on my own time and not pay attention to. I mean, subliminally, I'm paying attention to what he's playing,
right?
Because I got to hear his groove, but I don't focus on it. So I kind of stay out in the perimeters.
Yeah.
And I keep my clock going, my inner clock going, so that no matter what he's doing, I know where one is. Because if you start really focusing on what he's doing, you won't know where one is eventually, possibly. And that's dangerous if you're recording or even on a live gig,
Yeah.
So you have to really focus on time and really relegate time to your own clock.
Sure.
And and then with musician ears, you can observe what he's doing without totally being enthralled.
Yeah. Steve Gadd.
I gotten to play with him a number of times, and that's been completely awesome because I've been a huge fan of Steve's forever, growing up in New York and actually seeing him play in New York City with various groups like Stuff. But I can't remember the first time I got to play with him, but I did. I was producing a Michael Franks record. In fact, I was co-producing a Michael Franks record because I got to produce half of the record, and the other half was produced by Chuck Loeb, who I really miss. He was a wonderful cat and great guitarist, composer, producer, just a great guy. And so I had this wonderful experience to produce this Michael Franks record along with Chuck Loeb. In fact, we did this little pact. It was like Chuck said, hey, you could play on one of the tunes I'm producing and I'll play on one of the songs you're producing. And I said, great, that would be awesome. So we did that, and it was in New York. I opened the door for just having him put together musicians and engineer and studio, and I just come in there and do my thing with my 5 tunes, you know. So I got to play on those sessions. I got to play mostly with Sean Pelton for the stuff I was doing, and then I got to play with Steve on one tune on my sessions, and I played with him on one tune on Chuck's sessions. So that was one incident I got to play with Steve, which was awesome. And then the other one I'll bring up is I produced a Jeff Richmond record, and I recorded all the tracks at Jeff Lorber's studio because I got a cool deal over there with Jeff, and Jeff engineered. And Jeff Richmond wanted to get a drummer on the session, but he was unavailable, so he was a little perplexed. And I said, well, let me think about this and let me look around. And I just happened to be talking to this lady that I do all my publishing through. At one time I did. It's not there anymore, but she's with BFM, which is Big Fish Music. And they have a small label, and on the label is the Steve Gadd Band. So she, in conversation with her, she just out of the blue said, hey, Steve Gadd's going to be in town, and if you have any session work, he's looking for for some session work while he's in town. And I said, gee, I do have a session I need a drummer for. Would he be available on these certain dates? And she said, I think he is. Why don't you call him? And I did, and he was available, so I got him to play on this entire Jeff Richmond record that was, what's the name of that record? I can't remember now. So I've done now 4 records for him. Can't remember the name of the record, but he played on the whole thing. And that had a bunch of great musicians on there, and he played incredibly great. And
that's all you need to know.
Yeah, and I did play with them on a Jeff Porcaro tribute live performance that Dave Weckl was on, and he can't remember doing it.
Yeah.
But I was the only there were 4 bass players involved. Was it 4? Yeah. It was Will Lee, John Pena, Jason Sheff, and myself. And we did like a tag team kind of thing where, you know, one guy would play and then the next guy would go out there. And there were also, I believe, 3 drummers and a percussionist who also played drums. So that was Alex Acuna. And then it was Dave Weckl, and he doesn't remember. And it was Steve Gadd and Joe Porcaro. And then there were a variety of keyboard players. It was Dave Garfield, David Benoit, Steve Porcaro, and Larry Carlton on guitar and Mike Miller on guitar. And we did a whole program in this ballroom in this hotel that was a tribute to Jeff Porcaro. And the opening act was Elvin Jones, who played like a 30-minute drum solo.
Nice, man. Now, I've got just 2 or 3 of these, what I'm calling the drummer anomalies, the drummers that we wouldn't think would be playing with Jimmy Haslip. And I've got to find out what's going on with these guys. Denny Carmassi.
Denny Carmassi, yes. So that was also a one-off, and that was a crazy thing. I think that happened in the early 80s, and I got a phone call, and I don't even remember who called me, but the call was, can you fly to San Francisco and play on a documentary soundtrack that all the music composed by Ronnie Montrose, and I said yes. So I got a plane ticket and I flew to San Francisco, and I got put up in a hotel for 3 days. And for at least 2 days, we were in the studio recording all this music composed by Ronnie Montrose, who's a great guitarist, who's no longer with us. But and the keyboard player, oh gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. He was playing with Ronnie Montrose, but he became a really great producer, who's now married to Vonda Shepard, and he produced Bonnie Raitt.
It wasn't David Rosenthal, was it?
No, I'd have to look it up. Boy, it's senior moment here, just remembering all everybody. But Denny Carmassi was the drummer.
Denny Carmassi gave one of the greatest live rock and roll performances I've ever seen in my life back in the mid '80s with Heart, and it wasn't a chops thing at all, man. It's just he was so dialed in groove wise with what they were doing. He just played great.
Super
just
cat.
Played great, man. Yeah. Next guy.
Okay.
One of my personal favorites, Bobby Rondinelli.
That also was a one-off. And okay, so I've been playing with over the years on many different projects. In fact, this guy got me on the gig with Dave Mason and Friends in 1980, and I did a 10.5-month tour with that band. And the keyboard player was the guy that got me on the gig, and it was a guy named Mark Stein.
Okay.
Mark Stein was the original organist, keyboardist, lead singer of the Vanilla Fudge.
Right.
So Mark calls me and says, I want to do a record on Long Island, and I got some musicians, and I want you to play bass. And I said, great. So I flew back to New York, and I think at that time I even stayed at my parents' house, which was in Huntington, Long Island. Mm-hmm. And the drummer was Bobby Bondinelli. And first time I played with him, and I think he was still playing with Blue Oyster Cult at the time.
Either that or Rainbow, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Blue Oyster he was doing.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the guitar player's name, but he was on tour with Cyndi Lauper. And session player who was doing a lot of jingles and stuff in New York. So we went into this little studio in Manhasset, Long Island, and cut this whole record that was, that I remember the title was called White Magic, and had a big picture of a white leopard or something, or a tiger on the cover. And it was a Mark Stein solo record.
Sounds very 80s, man.
Yeah. And it was rock and roll, and it was cool.
But Bobby Rondinelli is a drummer that has come up on this podcast about 15 different times. I really like some of that stuff he did back with Rainbow and Blue Oyster Cult.
Yep.
Also, I think he played for just a minute with Twisted Sister.
He probably did. And he's, great drummer.
Yeah,
and
he is.
I love
really
playing with him.
Yeah.
So,
Tommy Aldridge.
Wow. Okay. Tommy Aldridge. That had to have been a session, and I can't even remember what that was. But I'd have to really think about that one.
Man, let me tell you, you've already answered about 20 of these. You get a pass on that one.
Okay.
What about Vinny Appice?
Vinny Appice, I was introduced to by his older brother, Carmine Appice, who was responsible for getting me to Los Angeles. And so I had this little band with this guitar player named Phil Brown, who I later produced. I did a tribute to Jimi Hendrix with, and it was just Phil Brown, myself, and Gary Novak, and that's a record called The Jimmy Project. But when we were playing together, Phil and I were playing together in New Orleans, and we met Carmine and jammed with them, and then he asked us to come to LA, which we did, and we thought we were going to get to play with him, but he was already signed to a contract with a group called KGB. And so he couldn't really play with us, so he brought Vinny out from New York to play with us, and we had a little band together. We rehearsed. We did some showcases, and I think I did some sessions with him around that time. In fact, I ended up back in New York with Vinny, and we played on a bunch of tracks for a guy named Ray Gomez, guitar player, which I did most of that record, and the tracks were either with Vinny Appice, and we also did some tracks with Narda Michael Walton. Yeah.
That's a little bit different there, huh?
Yeah.
As you can tell, I have a certain affinity for like New York hard rock drummers, man. There's an intangible in those guys, man, that I like a lot. And we're going to finish up with one of those guys also, Eric Carr.
Eric Carr was a one-off, and that was a crazy session. That was for a Kiss record.
Yeah.
So
please tell me that Gene and Paul were there. They
were there. And it was before they officially took away their makeup. So,
okay.
But of course they weren't wearing their makeup on the sessions. But I knew the producer. And the producer called me up in my apartment at the time. I was living in Los Feliz, California, and I was in my apartment, and the phone rang, and it was this guy, Michael J. Jackson, called in, and I picked up the phone, and he said, what are you doing, like, right now? And it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I said, well, I'm just kind of watching a TV show. And he said, can you gather up some guitars and come down to the record plant? And I'll explain when you get here.
Okay.
And I said, okay. I figured this will be interesting. So I put a couple of basses in my Volkswagen and shot down to the record plant. I got there, and there he was at the front door waiting for me. It was around 11:15, and he goes, okay. So this is for a Kiss record. We can't give you credit, but we'll take care of you. And you just got to come in here and play bass on a bunch of tunes because I'm on a deadline. And we got to get this thing done, and Gene won't play. Now, he gave me a reason why, and Gene swears that was not the reason why. So I won't even go into that. But I walked into the studio, and Eric Carr was playing on a track.
Okay.
Laying down drums. So I got to meet him, and Eric Carr was on that entire record. It was a record called Creatures of the Night. So there was Gene, and he sat in front of me while I played on like 7 tunes.
Did you play on I Love It Loud?
I don't think I played on that, but I remember playing on Danger.
Uh-huh.
And they were, I remember Danger because I just loved the title of that track.
Yeah.
And in fact, on that tune, he kept saying I needed to play harder. So I ended
Bigger
up.
pick.
I had no pick, so I used a quarter.
That's Billy Gibbons style.
I played the whole track with a quarter on, and he was fine with that. So. That was quite an experience. I think I left the studio at 7:30 in the morning. The sun was up, and I just schlepped back to my house and crashed for the rest of the day, and that was my experience.
It's worth it for the story, isn't it? You know? Yeah.
And Eric Carr was cool, and I think while I was in there recording, Vinnie Vincent was in another room cutting guitars.
Yeah, yeah. Charlie Watts.
Okay, Charlie Watts. Again, that was a one-off, but it was a really fun project. So I did a lot of things and became friends with Andy Johns, producer-engineer. So I got a call from Andy at one point, and he said, I want you to play on this record I'm producing. And I'll give you the address, and we need you for like 4 days. And I said, okay, So I drove to the address, and it was a Ronnie Wood record called 1, 2, 3, 4. So I played on pretty much all that. Ronnie, I obviously played bass on some stuff. I don't know. I must have played on 6 or 7 tunes, and the drummer was Charlie Watts.
Did you cut simultaneously with him?
Live in a garage at a house in Mandeville Canyon that they converted into a recording studio, and the band, it was a whole band. So it was Ian McLaglen on organ, and it was their piano player who played on all these incredible songs. Wonderful guy, and I mainly hung out with him because.
Are you talking about that played with the Stones?
Yeah,
Chuck Leavell.
No, it was before Chuck.
Okay.
Yeah, it was before him. He was British.
Okay.
And again, a senior moment, but he was incredible, and I mostly hung with him because he was not allowed to drink, and I was a vegan at the time, so I was showing up with my fresh squeezed orange juice and trail mix, and these other guys were drinking other kinds of beverages. And so it was Ronnie on guitar, and piano player was this gentleman, wonderful guy, and Ian, who also passed away just fairly recently, I guess, and Charlie, which was a treat because I got to sit right next to him and just play these tunes with them. So that was quite a 4-day experience to hang with those guys.
I'm gonna make an educated guess and say that there was no click on those sessions.
No click at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll privately tell you a funny story about it, but I don't feel comfortable telling you this right here.
Well, we hadn't even started the interview yet. So we only been going for an hour and a half. Well, listen, man. That information about those drummers was absolutely invaluable, man. Thank you very much for that. But I can't let you get out of here.
Okay.
Until we do. There's a time-honored tradition that we have on this show.
Okay.
I don't know if Joe told you anything about this, but we do this thing at the very end of the interviews. And let me tell you, you're in good company because Rosenblatt's done this, Brackline's done this, Sonny's done this. Everybody who's been on the show's done this. It's been a good sport. And what we call it the Drummers Weekly Groove Cast Rorschach Test.
Okay.
And it's basically a psychiatric evaluation. And what we do
I may not pass this one.
Well, let me tell you, you've already done okay because you passed the first psychiatric test because the very first test was I asked you what microphone you wanted, and you just you didn't diva out on me, man. You said whatever, and I gave you the RE20.
It's awesome. That's a good mic.
So what this is it's a series of 20 short questions, and they're all across the board, man. Some have nothing to do with music. It's just fun stuff.
Okay.
I don't want you to think about this. I just want you to blurt out the first thing that comes to mind.
You got it. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go.
Here we go. Live. In-ear monitors or wedges?
Wedges.
What's your favorite country to tour?
Anywhere in Scandinavia, so that's broader than one country.
I'm going to say Finland.
Okay. I have been. I love Finland.
You're originally from New York, but you live in L.A. Lived in L.A. longer probably now than you have in New York, right?
Yeah, I have,
now, here's the important question. New York sports teams or L.A. sports teams?
New York sports teams.
Giants or Jets?
Jets.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Mets or Yankees?
Either one is you'd have to be sorry.
Mets or Yankees?
Yankees.
Islanders or Rangers?
Rangers.
All right. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Just had some before we got in here, right? Favorite potato at the baked potato?
Cheese and broccoli.
Gotcha. Tour bus bunk, top, middle, or bottom?
Middle.
Gotcha. That's far and away the most popular answer. I'm the bottom bunk guy. I like the bottom bunk.
I've done the bottom out of, the other ones were taken, so there's none.
Worst traffic, New York or L.A.?
L.A.
When you set up live, do you like to be on the ride cymbal side of the drummer or hi-hat side?
Hi-hat.
When you play live, do you prefer no click or with a click?
Well, I prefer no click, but if the click's in there, that's fine.
Got it. Social media, love it or hate it?
I'm okay with it.
PC or Mac?
Mac.
Text or phone call?
I like phone calls.
What's your preferred recording software?
Well, I go with Pro Tools because that's most of the guys I work with. That's their game.
Sure, industry standard. I get it. LA question: Ralph's or Safeway?
Well, I have a deal with Ralph's. I got one of these super saver kind of things. So I go to Ralph's, but I do prefer Erewhon.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Well, here's your Ralph's tip of the day. When you're in the South and in the, I guess, South and East, that Ralph's card will work at a Kroger's.
Oh.
Yes.
So Kroger's. I'll go with Kroger's.
Go with Kroger when you're here. NAMM show. Love it, or is it a necessary evil?
At this point in time in my life, a necessary evil.
Elvin or Tony?
That's a really tough one.
I got a tougher one coming up.
I'll go with Tony, but Elvin, it could go either way.
Yeah. Favorite TV show?
Favorite TV show? Wow. I don't watch a lot of normal TV, so let me think a little bit about that.
You want to come back to that one?
Yeah, let me think about that because there's a couple of things I could say because I mostly watch like dramatic series like this this thing that was.
Is it on like Amazon Prime or?
Yeah, it's Netflix.
Netflix.
So
yeah.
So Netflix, is that an answer? No.
We'll go with it, and if you think of something, we'll go back and we'll punch it back in. We'll edit it back into the mix.
I'll even I can name an old show that I really got into that's not even on it. Boston Legal.
Okay, good. I like it. Paul Chambers or Ray Brown?
Paul Chambers.
Okay. What's your favorite hobby outside of music?
Watching sports.
Okay. Final question. And you can take a moment on this one.
Okay.
Try not to hurt anybody's feelings. Of all the drummers you've played with, who has the best sounding kit? You got to throw in cymbals and everything, man.
Yeah. Okay. I could probably name like 30 guys, but I'm going to go with Will Kennedy.
Nice. I'm writing these answers down at the same time.
Okay, sure.
Jimmy, fantastic, man. We just did an hour and 40 minutes.
Awesome. We could have gone more.
Let me tell you, we could certainly go longer. Anything
There's
else?
A lot.
Yeah. Anything else you want to, you have any other promotion, plug dates? Anything else you want to say?
Well, yeah, nothing in mind now. I know I'm going to be doing some touring with Jeff Lorber Fusion coming up. And it looks like I'm going to be doing some collaborative touring with Jeff Lorber and Mike Stern together. And then I have some more Oz stuff, but that's over in Europe. And I think that's going to be with Dennis Chambers.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, another guy that nobody on this show's ever heard of. So, yeah. Well, let me tell you, if you think of anything else, Jimmy, before this show goes live, you just let me know. We'll throw it in the show notes. So everybody that's listening, make sure you check the show notes. We're going to send you over to Jimmy's website. We'll send you over to his social media so you can pick up all the stuff that he's been talking about. Man, it's been a pleasure, Jimmy.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Phil.
Oh, absolutely, man. All right, how about that Jimmy Haslip? Man, that was a great time. Let me tell you, I was a little bit hesitant at first when we were going to do it in the lobby of that hotel because it was really busy and there were a lot of stuff going on, which of course you can hear, but that somewhat added to the ambience and kind of the vibe of the entire thing. Plus, it didn't hinder Jimmy at all. He was on 10 right from the get-go, so it was a really good time. Now, before I forget, what you're hearing underneath me speaking right now is a track that Jimmy recorded that's on the Blue Canoe label. That's from his group called Elemental featuring Jimmy Branley, and this is a tune that Jimmy Haslip wrote called Boomtown. So I'll pot that up a little bit toward the end so you can hear some more, but head over to Blue Canoe Records so you can see and purchase that album. One other thing, check the show notes before you jettison this episode because I'm going to include some links that are going to take you over to Haslip's social media so you can check out what he's doing. You can go see him play live. It's great to listen to these guys on records, but these days we make our money playing live, so make sure you go see Jimmy the next time he's close to you. Thanks for listening. Before we get out of here, let's get these perfunctories out of the way. Make sure you go over to drummersweeklygroovecast.com. There you can interact with us. Everything that's DWG, you can listen to all of our episodes. You can email us through our email form. You can manage your social media there. You can also check out our videos. And then when you're done with that, head over to our social media. We're on Facebook. We're Drummers Weekly Groovecast. At Twitter, we are at DW Groovecast. And then Instagram, we are Drummers Weekly Groovecast. If you're an Apple user, the next time you're in iTunes, take just a moment. Go over to our page, the Drummers Weekly Groovecast podcast homepage inside of iTunes, and leave us a short review. It really helps us. People who are looking for our type of content, when they do searches and look for these drumming podcasts and music podcasts, we rank a little bit higher. You guys have been great doing that so far. Anytime you can do that, just click those stars, give us a 5-star rating. We'd greatly appreciate it. All right, I think that's going to do it for now. We will see you again next Monday. On behalf of Jimmy Haslip, this is Phil. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.